What happens when one of music's biggest legends walks into what should be a friendly daytime chat show, only to be blindsided by a host who seems determined to make him uncomfortable? In just 39 seconds, a single comment from Denise Welch would trigger a confrontation so explosive that it would end with one of the most dramatic walkouts in British television history. This is the story of how a simple interview turned into an absolute disaster. The Loose Women studio was buzzing with its usual energy. The panel was seated at their signature desk, with Denise Welch front and center, flanked by Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Colleen Nolan. The audience was packed, excited to see the legendary Elton John, who was scheduled to discuss his latest album and upcoming tour. Elton walked onto the set to thunderous applause, looking immaculate in his signature oversized glasses and a vibrant purple suit. He waved to the audience, his smile warm and genuine. He took his seat on the guest sofa, adjusting his jacket as the applause died down. "Elton, welcome to Loose Women," Denise began, her smile bright but somehow not reaching her eyes. "We're so thrilled to have you here." "Thank you for having me," Elton replied graciously. "It's lovely to be here." Ruth leaned forward, her voice warm. "Elton, you look absolutely fantastic. That suit is incredible." "Oh, thank you, darling," Elton said with a laugh. "I do love a bit of color." The conversation started pleasantly enough. They discussed his new album, the creative process, and his upcoming tour dates. Elton was charming and animated, telling stories that had the audience laughing. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. Then Denise shifted in her seat, her expression changing slightly. "So, Elton," she said, her tone taking on a different quality. "You've been in the music industry for, over 50 years now?" "Something like that, yes," Elton replied with a chuckle. "And you've certainly made quite a lot of money from it," Denise continued, and there was something pointed in her voice now. The other panelists exchanged quick glances. Elton's smile became a bit more fixed. "Well, I've been very fortunate, yes." "Fortunate," Denise repeated, leaning back in her chair. "That's one way to put it. Some might say you've been absolutely greedy about it." The studio went quiet. You could feel the temperature in the room drop. Ruth's eyes widened slightly, and Colleen shifted uncomfortably. Elton blinked, clearly taken aback. "I'm sorry." "Well," Denise said, waving her hand dismissively, "charging your fans hundreds of pounds for concert tickets, living in multiple mansions, all those expensive cars and jewelry. Some people might say it's a bit much, don't you think?" Janet Street Porter cleared her throat. "Denise, I think—" But Denise talked right over her. "I mean, you're worth millions and millions, and yet you keep touring, keep selling merchandise, keep finding ways to squeeze more money out of people who've already given you so much." Elton's face had changed now. The warmth was gone, replaced by something harder. "With respect, Denise, I think you're misunderstanding something quite fundamental here." "Oh, am I?" Denise shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yes, you are," Elton said firmly. "First of all, my ticket prices are set by the venues and promoters, not by me personally. Second, I employ hundreds of people. My tours provide jobs for musicians, crew members, drivers, security personnel, caterers, and countless others." Ruth tried to intervene. "That's a really good point, Elton." But Denise wasn't finished. "Still doesn't change the fact that you're sitting on a fortune while your fans struggle to afford to see you." Elton's jaw tightened. "My fans, as you call them, are adults who make their own choices about how to spend their money. I've never forced anyone to buy a ticket or an album. And might I add, I've raised over 400 million pounds for my AIDS Foundation, helping people around the world. What exactly have you done with your platform, Denise?" The audience gasped. Colleen's hand went to her mouth. Janet was nodding slowly, clearly on Elton's side. Denise's face flushed red. "Excuse me? Are you really going to sit there and lecture me?" "I'm not lecturing anyone," Elton replied, his voice steady but firm. I'm simply pointing out that you've come at me with accusations that are unfounded, and frankly quite rude. Rude? Denise laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about rude? How about the fact that you've refused to take pictures with fans? I've heard stories about that. Denise, perhaps we should move on, Ruth interjected, her voice pleading. Elton held up a hand. No, it's fine. Let me address that. I've spent decades taking pictures with fans, signing autographs, meeting people after shows. But I'm also a human being who sometimes needs privacy. When I'm having dinner with my husband, or when I'm with my children, yes, I occasionally say no to photos. That doesn't make me a bad person. It makes me someone with boundaries. Boundaries, Denise scoffed. That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of being in the public eye. Janet had had enough. Denise, this is completely out of order. Elton is our guest. I'm just asking the questions that people want answered, Denise snapped back at Janet. No, Elton said, his voice rising slightly. You're not asking questions. You're launching attacks. There's a difference. Colleen tried to diffuse the situation. Elton, tell us about your family. Your sons must be so proud of you. But Denise wouldn't let it go. Before we get all sentimental, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Your lifestyle is excessive, Elton. You can't deny that. Elton stared at her for a long moment. My lifestyle? Let me tell you something about my lifestyle. I work hard. I've worked hard my entire life. I came from nothing, from a council house in Pinner, and I built everything I have through talent, dedication, and yes, a lot of bloody hard work. I don't apologize for my success. But don't you think, Denise pressed, that at some point enough is enough? How many houses does one person need? How is that any of your business? Elton shot back. Do I come to your home and count your possessions? Do I question your choices? Ruth was shaking her head, clearly uncomfortable. I really think we should change the subject. No, Ruth, Denise said sharply. I want to hear him defend this. Defend having 6 homes when people are sleeping on the streets. Elton's eyes flashed. I've housed homeless people. My foundation has funded housing projects. I've done more for the homeless than most people could even imagine. But I'm not going to sit here and be made to feel guilty for working hard and being successful. That's not fair. And frankly, it's beneath you. Beneath me? Denise's voice was getting louder now. You're the one who's beneath something. You're beneath the pedestal everyone's put you on. The audience was completely silent now. Some people looked shocked, others angry. Janet was shaking her head in disbelief. You know what? Elton said, his voice suddenly very quiet, which somehow made it more powerful. I came here today expecting a friendly conversation. I came here to talk about my music, my tour, things that matter to me. Instead, you've decided to use this as an opportunity to attack me, to try to tear me down for reasons I can't even begin to understand. I'm not attacking you, Denise insisted, but her voice was less certain now. You are attacking me, Elton interrupted. Every word out of your mouth has been designed to make me look bad, to make me feel bad. Well, I won't apologize for who I am or what I've achieved, and I won't sit here and be treated like this. Colleen reached out. Elton, please. No, Colleen, he said, standing up. I appreciate you trying to mediate, but this has gone too far. Denise stood up too, her face still red. Oh, so you're just going to run away? That's very mature. I'm not running away, Elton said, his voice clear and strong. I'm choosing to remove myself from a hostile environment. There's a difference. Hostile? Denise laughed harshly. I've just been honest with you. Maybe you're not used to that. Honest? Elton repeated, and now there was real anger in his voice. You call that honesty? Let me be honest with you, Denise. You're a bully. You've tried to bully me on national television, and I won't stand for it. Ruth stood up quickly. Elton, I am so sorry. This wasn't... I know it wasn't you, Ruth, Elton said gently. You and the others have been lovely, but I can't stay here. Janet nodded at him sympathetically. We understand completely. Denise crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. You're being oversensitive. Elton turned to face her directly. Oversensitive? You've questioned my character, my integrity, my work ethic, and my choices, all within the span of a few minutes. Any reasonable person would be upset. I was just doing my job, Denise said defensively. Your job is to interview guests, not to ambush them, Elton replied. There's a way to ask challenging questions without being cruel. You could have asked me about ticket prices in a respectful way. You could have discussed wealth inequality in the music industry without making it personal. But you chose to attack. That was your choice. The audience was starting to murmur now, and from the sound of it, they were on Elton's side. I think you're overreacting, Denise said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. And I think you're underestimating how inappropriate your behavior has been, Elton responded. I've been in this business for over 5 decades. I've done thousands of interviews. I've been asked tough questions before. But this was something else entirely. This was mean-spirited. Colleen spoke up, her voice small. Denise, maybe we could... Stay out of this, Colleen. Denise snapped, and Colleen flinched. Don't talk to her like that, Elton said sharply. She's trying to help. I don't need help, Denise shot back. And neither do you, apparently. You're doing just fine defending your excessive lifestyle. There you go again, Elton said, shaking his head. You just can't help yourself, can you? You have to get that last dig in. I'm just being truthful, Denise said, but her voice wavered. Truthful? Elton's eyebrows rose. You don't know the first thing about truth. You've constructed an entire narrative in your head about who I am based on nothing but assumptions and prejudice. That's not fair, Denise protested. None of this has been fair, Elton replied. From the moment you started this line of questioning, nothing about it has been fair. Ruth moved closer to Elton. Please, Elton, I'm so sorry about this. It's not your fault, Ruth, Elton said again. You've been nothing but professional and kind. Janet stood up too. For what it's worth, I think you've handled this with incredible grace. Thank you, Janet, Elton said with a small smile. Denise rolled her eyes. Oh, please, this is so dramatic. Dramatic? Elton's voice rose again. You've spent the last several minutes trying to humiliate me on television, and I'm the one being dramatic? I haven't tried to humiliate you, Denise protested. I've asked you legitimate questions. There was nothing legitimate about the way you asked them, Elton countered. Your tone, your word choice, your entire demeanor has been aggressive and confrontational from the moment you started asking about money. Maybe because it's a valid topic, Denise argued. It could have been, Elton agreed. If you'd approached it with any semblance of respect or journalistic integrity. But you didn't. You came at me like I'd personally wronged you somehow. You represent everything that's wrong with celebrity culture, Denise said, and there was real venom in her voice now. The other panelists gasped. Ruth put her hand on Denise's arm. Denise, stop. No. Denise pulled her arm away. Someone needs to say it. Elton stared at her for a long moment. You don't even know me. You don't know what I do with my time, my money, my life. You've made assumptions based on tabloid stories and gossip. That's not journalism. That's just lazy and cruel. I know enough, Denise said stubbornly. You know nothing, Elton replied quietly. You know what you've read, what you've heard, but you don't know me. You don't know that I spend hours working with my foundation. You don't know that I've personally paid for people's medical treatments, their education, their housing. You don't know that I've visited hospices and hospitals, that I've held the hands of dying people, that I've tried to use whatever platform I have to make the world a better place. His voice cracked slightly on those last words, and several audience members were visibly moved. Anyone can throw money at a problem, Denise said, but her voice was weaker now. It's not just money, Elton said. It's time. It's energy. It's caring. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Because you're too busy trying to tear people down to build anyone up. Colleen was crying now, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Janet was staring at Denise with something close to disgust. I think, Ruth said carefully, that we've reached a point where we need to take a break. I won't be here when you come back, Elton said, picking up his phone from the coffee table. I'm leaving. Fine, Denise said, but she didn't sound fine. She sounded rattled. Leave then. Gladly, Elton replied. But before I go, I want to say something to the audience. He turned to face them, and they erupted in supportive applause. Thank you, he said, waiting for them to quiet down. Thank you for your kindness. I want you to know that this doesn't represent how I usually feel about television interviews. I love connecting with people. I love sharing my music and my story. But I also believe in dignity and respect. And when those things are absent, I believe in walking away. More applause. Someone in the audience shouted, "We love you, Elton." He smiled, a real smile this time. I love you too. Thank you for understanding. He turned back to the panel. Ruth, Janet, Colleen, thank you for trying to make this work. I appreciate your professionalism. They all nodded, Ruth looking close to tears herself. Then he looked at Denise. And you, I hope you'll think about this. I hope you'll consider whether this is really the kind of interviewer you want to be, because you're better than this, or at least you should be. Denise opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Elton adjusted his glasses one last time. Right then, I'll be off. He walked toward the exit, his posture straight, his head high. The audience stood up, clapping and cheering. Some were chanting his name. As he reached the door, he turned back one last time. And for the record, Denise, my ticket prices are completely in line with other artists of my caliber, but I wouldn't expect you to have done that research. And with that, he was gone. The studio was in chaos. The audience was still applauding. Ruth was shaking her head. Janet was glaring at Denise. Colleen was still crying. Denise sat down heavily in her chair, her face pale now. Well, she said weakly, that was unexpected. Unexpected? Janet's voice was sharp. It was inevitable. You backed him into a corner. I was just doing my job, Denise repeated, but no one was buying it anymore. Your job is to interview guests, not to attack them, Ruth said, her voice firmer than usual. That was completely unacceptable. Oh, come on, Denise said, trying to regain her composure. He's a celebrity. He can handle a few tough questions. Those weren't tough questions, Colleen said, her voice thick with emotion. That was a character assassination. You're all overreacting, Denise insisted, but her hands were shaking slightly. We're not, Janet said flatly. And the audience knows it. Listen to them. The audience was still buzzing, and the sentiment was clear. They were angry at Denise. Some were booing now. A producer rushed onto the set, whispering urgently to Ruth. Ruth nodded, then turned to the camera. We're going to take a short break, she said, her voice strained. As soon as the camera light went off, Ruth turned to Denise. What were you thinking? I was thinking, Denise said, her voice rising defensively, that someone needed to ask him the hard questions. There's a difference between hard questions and harassment, Janet said coldly. What you did was harassment. I disagree, Denise said, but she looked around at her fellow panelists and seemed to realize she was completely alone in her opinion. Colleen wiped her eyes. He was so hurt. Did you see his face? He'll be fine, Denise said dismissively. He's Elton John. Being famous doesn't mean you don't have feelings, Ruth said sharply. How would you feel if someone treated you that way? Denise didn't answer. The producer was still on set, talking rapidly on his headset. He looked stressed. Very stressed. "Is he coming back?" Ruth asked hopefully. The producer shook his head. "He's already left the building." The panel fell silent. Even Denise seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation now. "This is bad," Colleen whispered. "It's worse than bad," Janet said, looking at Denise. "This is a disaster, and it's entirely your fault." "My fault?" Denise's voice was shrill now. "I was trying to have a real conversation." "A real conversation involves listening," Ruth said. "You weren't listening. You were attacking." "I was not attacking," Denise insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. The audience was still restless. Some people were leaving. Others were talking loudly, clearly upset. Another producer came onto the set. "We need to figure out what we're doing when we come back from break." "What is there to figure out?" Janet asked. "Our guest has left." Denise drove him away. Denise stood up abruptly. "I'm not going to sit here and be blamed for this." "Then where are you going to sit?" Ruth asked quietly. "Because you are to blame." For a moment, Denise looked like she might walk off the set, too. But then she sat back down, her shoulders slumping. "Fine," she said quietly. "Fine." The producers huddled together, discussing options. The panel sat in uncomfortable silence. The audience continued to murmur. Finally, the first producer came over. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. When we come back, Ruth, you're going to address what happened. Keep it brief, keep it professional. Then we move on to the next segment." Ruth nodded. "What about Denise?" The producer looked at Denise, his expression unreadable. "Denise will apologize." "I will not," Denise said immediately. "Yes, you will," the producer said firmly, "or you won't be on this panel much longer." Denise's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Deadly serious," the producer replied. "What happened here today was unacceptable. We've already had complaints from the audience, and I guarantee we'll have more once this airs." "If it airs," another producer muttered. "Oh, it'll air," Janet said grimly. "This will be everywhere by tomorrow." Colleen looked miserable. "This is awful. He's such a lovely man, and we treated him terribly." "You didn't treat him terribly," Ruth corrected gently. "Denise did." Denise's face was red again, but this time it looked more like embarrassment than anger. "I still think I was right to ask those questions." "But wrong in how you asked them," the producer said. "Surely you can see that." Denise was quiet for a long moment. Then, very quietly, she said, "Maybe I could have been gentler." "Maybe?" Janet laughed bitterly. "There's no maybe about it." The producer checked his watch. "We're back in 60 seconds. Ruth, are you ready?" Ruth straightened her papers and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Denise?" Denise took a deep breath. "Yes." "Make it sincere," the producer warned. "The audience will know if you're not." The countdown began. 10 seconds. 5, 3, 2. The camera light came back on. Ruth looked directly into the camera, her expression serious. "Welcome back to Loose Women. As you've just witnessed, our interview with Elton John ended rather unexpectedly. On behalf of the show, I want to apologize to Elton and to all of you watching at home. We pride ourselves on creating a welcoming environment for our guests, and today, we failed to do that." She glanced at Denise. Denise swallowed hard, then looked at the camera. "I also want to apologize. My approach to certain questions was inappropriate, and I regret any hurt I caused. Elton John is a legend and deserves to be treated with respect." The words sounded rehearsed and hollow, and from the audience reaction, it was clear no one was buying it. Ruth continued quickly. "We understand if viewers are upset by what they saw. We're upset too. We hope that Elton will accept our apologies and we wish him all the best with his tour and his future endeavors. Janet jumped in. I just want to add that Elton handled himself with incredible dignity and grace. His work with the AIDS Foundation and countless other charities speaks for itself. He's a class act. Colleen nodded emphatically. Absolutely. We're lucky we got to meet him at all, even if it didn't end the way we'd hoped. Ruth looked down at her notes. Right. Well, moving on. But the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to be a celebration of one of music's greatest legends had turned into a cautionary tale about the importance of respect and basic human decency. Elton John had walked onto that set as a gracious guest, and he'd walked off it with his dignity intact and his reputation enhanced. The same could not be said for everyone involved. The remaining segments of the show continued, but the energy was gone. The audience was subdued. The panelists seemed distracted, and Denise, despite her apology, looked like she knew she'd made a terrible mistake. When the show finally ended and the cameras stopped rolling, the panel dispersed quickly. Ruth and Janet left together, talking in low voices. Colleen gathered her things quietly, still looking upset. Denise sat alone at the desk for a moment, staring at nothing. Then she too stood and walked off the set, her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. The studio audience filed out, many of them still talking about what they'd witnessed. Some were sympathetic to Elton, others were angry at Denise. A few were simply shocked that such a thing had happened on live television. In his car, driving away from the studio, Elton John removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. His hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. His husband, David, sitting beside him, put a comforting hand on his arm. "Are you okay?" David asked quietly. Elton was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I think I am. I stood up for myself. That's all I could do." "You did more than that," David said. "You showed them, and everyone watching, how to handle a bully with grace and strength." Elton smiled slightly. "I suppose I did, didn't I?" "You absolutely did," David confirmed. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you, darling," Elton said, putting his glasses back on. "Now, let's go home. I've had quite enough of television for one day." As the car drove away from the studio, Elton looked out the window at the London streets passing by. He thought about the interview, about Denise's accusations, about his own response. He'd been hurt, yes. Angry, certainly. But he'd also been honest, and he'd refused to be diminished by someone who didn't know him and didn't deserve to judge him. He thought about his career, spanning over 5 decades. The countless shows, the millions of records sold, the awards and accolades. But more than that, he thought about the lives he'd touched, the people he'd helped, the difference he'd tried to make in the world. And he realized that no matter what anyone said, no matter how they tried to tear him down or make him feel small, he knew who he was. He knew his worth, and that was something no hostile interview could ever take away. Back at the studio, the producers were already in damage control mode. Phone calls were being made. Meetings were being scheduled. The fallout from the interview was only just beginning. But for Elton John, it was already over. He'd said his piece, he'd stood his ground, and he'd walked away with his head held high. And really, what more could anyone ask? The sun was setting over London as Elton's car merged into traffic. He reached over and squeezed David's hand, grateful for the love and support that had sustained him through decades in the spotlight. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever the tabloids said, whatever social media decided, he would face it the same way he'd faced that interview, with dignity, honesty, and an unshakable sense of self. Because at the end of the day, that's what mattered. Not the opinions of others, not the judgment of those who didn't understand, but the knowledge that he'd lived his life authentically, generously, and with as much grace as he could muster. And if that meant occasionally walking away from hostile situations, then so be it. Some battles were worth fighting, and some weren't worth the energy. Elton John had learned long ago which was which. As the car turned onto his street and his home came into view, Elton felt the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He was home. He was safe. He was loved. And that truly was all that mattered.